Hi, welcome to this episode of Herald Cafe. Today we've got an author and a former editor and a journalist, Mr. Samrat Chaudhary. Sorry. Thank you for your time that you could come here, and congratulations for your new release of the book, Northeast India Political History.
Yes.
First, I would like to know a little bit origin of that idea. What made you write a book on the complex history of Northeast? Actually, it's like layered with so many issues.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Shillong during the troubled decade of the 80s and early 90s. And so basically the events and issues of the place were all around me as I was growing up. And so I had always been interested in those issues. But then life took me in other directions. I ended up studying engineering in Gujarat, and then I meandered into journalism, and I landed up in Delhi, Bombay and Bangalore. But then I somehow, completely by chance, found myself writing a book on the Brahmaputra River, my previous book,
The Braided River.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so when I started working on that, I was spending a lot of time again in Assam and Arunachal,
Doing research
doing
and
my field work and
Okay.
research. And I sort of got back into touch with the place and the issues. That book was a travelogue, but in the course of writing that book, my re-engagement with the Northeast happened.
Right.
And I also ended up co-editing another book alongside that, a very different book on the insider-outsider issue in Northeast India, which is still, it's still, for example, the issue which is driving conflict in Manipur right now as we speak. So I got back into engagement with those matters, and that eventually, so I'd been putting away material for a while, but it eventually led to the writing of the political history, which I would not probably have thought of if somebody had not prodded me, but I got prodded into it and I ended up writing it.
So the issues of Northeast, now you see so deeply, you have taken a deep dive into political history. Can you compare it with other parts of India? Are there some common factors, or what are the broad themes that you have pulled up in that book, like supposedly geopolitics or identity issues or micro-nationalism?
Right. Well, we talk of the Northeast as a region, but we must remember that the official region has 8 states, the 8th being Sikkim.
Okay.
But in any case, it is at least 7 states within the 7 sister states, as they are called, of the Northeast. And that in another part of India, if you start counting 7 states, you can go actually from Kanyakumari to Kashmir.
Totally.
So
I can understand.
It's a large
yes.
and diverse area. So the Northeast is internally large and diverse. There are certain factors which have been widespread in the Northeast in terms of the political history.
One example, please, if you can.
Yeah. So every state is different, and every state has its own different, issues and culture and history and background.
Yeah.
But the issue of nationalism, and by nationalism I don't just mean Indian nationalism or Hindu nationalism or any of those, but for example, we've had separatist insurgencies based on ideas of having separate countries.
True.
The Naga
Alpha
movement
Naga,
in Assam, the Alpha movement, and in Manipur there were several, and so those have been a common feature in many parts of the Northeast.
Okay.
It is the idea of each group having its own space, so to say.
Right.
It is a kind of nationalism, and it is identity based on what might be called sub-nationalism or smaller nationalism, but it is a form of nationalism. So that I found to be a very common thing. It is there in other parts of India also in different forms.
Okay. Like one thing came to my mind is like Telangana struggle, it's going to be a very heavy loaded book, this Northeast political history. And it's out, it's published by Hearst Publication.
Yes.
And it's not in India yet.
So it's not yet been published anywhere. It's due to come out in the UK first in this July. In the next week or so, it should be out in the UK, and the Indian edition is to be brought out by HarperCollins, and sometime probably next month, August.
And going back a little bit about your first book, The Urban Jungle. It's a fiction and which got nominated for Man-Asian Literary Prize. Please tell us a little bit more about that. Why that is your first novel? There must be so many, I don't know, ideas, and your getting to write the first novel. This experience.
So I was actually at that time living in Delhi and working for the Hindustan Times there, and I had an interest. I wanted to try writing a book. I have learned to do a lot of things by doing them, learning by doing. And so the way I ended up writing that book was actually rather odd. So I briefly got suspended by the editor of the paper, then editor of the paper, for a small error. I had managed to inadvertently knock off the final paragraph of the great man's column without him noticing or me noticing. And so I got suspended for a week. During that week of suspension, I ended up meeting the editor of Penguin Books and discussing ideas, and the book, it resulted eventually in that book. The book itself was an adventure set in Delhi at the turn of the millennium, and it used certain names of characters from Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book. So in that sense, I attempted a layered narrative, which was at the first level an adventure, but at another level I was also trying to
comment politically,
on ideas of colonialism and neo-colonialism.
Nice. Then I loved your second book, The Braided River, and that the journey that you undertook from Arunachal to deep into Bangladesh border. You went with your photographer friend with minimum resources, and what I like is that that book has been very well received by everybody. So what is your reflection on that reception of the book? About the readers' thoughts that comes to you. You must be interacting with a lot of readers. Any takeaway from those kind of conversations?
I have been pleasantly surprised by the reception the book got, because that book, I mean, for me, when we were traveling, it was my friend Akshay Mahajan, the photographer you mentioned, who is based in Goa, and I, and we were just two guys out having fun. We enjoyed our journey, even though it was in many places really uncomfortable and difficult, but we enjoyed ourselves. We had great fun doing that trip, and or rather those trips, because it was not just one trip. We had to break it into sections. We enjoyed ourselves, and I enjoyed writing the book also. I think what people have liked is actually that some of that sense of fun has probably filtered through into the book itself, and so I think that is why I have, even though the book came out in the middle of the COVID pandemic during the second wave, we didn't even have a launch function. It was just one Zoom event. There was no actual launch, but it still found its readers, and I have been pleasantly surprised to run into people, including in Goa over here a few days ago, that I met somebody who said, "Oh yeah, that book I have come." I was happy to see that it's getting around, making its way in the world.
And talking about that book, with that book you have let the readers know about the course of Brahmaputra, also the culture, and a lot of open-ended questions are there, like in that book, about the identity issues, migration issues, or the heavy-handedness of military. So many issues are there. And talking about that Brahmaputra, the mighty Brahmaputra, the huge one, and compared to the problems that we are having with Madai River here, my question to you is like, to what extent we can go for the ownership of a shared resource? It's a commons, right? Water is a commons, like it's for everybody to use. Like in Brahmaputra, macro, China, India, here, our neighbor friends. So uh, do you find it a similarity, or is there a way forward to understand the extent of ownership a state can, or the people of a state can over the
So I am not very familiar with the issues of the Mahadi,
Mm-hmm.
but I can say something about the Brahmaputra and
Yeah.
China, which you mentioned about.
Hmm.
It's absolutely correct, of course, that these issues crop up, in both within domestic, between states, and
Yes.
at the international level.
Yes.
And so in the case of China and India, the concerns are that China will steal the river altogether.
True.
Although that would actually be impossible, because most of the water in the Brahmaputra is from the southern aspect of the Himalayas, meaning that most of it is from the Indian side of the border.
Okay.
So they can't steal the river
Right.
even if they want to, but they can definitely steal part of it.
With the damification of the river.
The Sanpo in
yeah.
Tibet. So
Okay.
if there are already there were at the time I was writing the book already 4 dams operating on the river.
Mhm.
They are planning more. There
Mhm.
is one which is planned close to the Indian border at what is called the Great Bend, which is a matter of concern. But the thing is that there is a great enthusiasm for building dams on the Indian side of the border as well.
Also, yes.
And there have been proposals to build somewhere around 168 dams on the Indian side in
Okay,
Arunachal
yeah,
and
yeah,
Assam. And those dams have not ended up getting built because of the opposition of local people,
Mhm.
especially the tribes in Arunachal, who have been very clear that they would not like that to happen. I think between states or between nations, it is necessary to have some kind of mutually agreeable solution. You
Yes.
can't just have the upriver, upper riparian state just doing what it wants without the agreement of the downriver state, regardless of whether it is required by law or not. There may
True.
not be an existing law that
Mm.
necessitates such a step, but it should still proceed with caution, and it should not just build dams or divert water without the consent of the people of the downriver state. Secondly, sometimes you find that the enthusiasm for building is actually an enthusiasm for construction projects, because construction projects lead to a lot of people making a lot of money. So the true motivation behind the enthusiasm for dam projects should also be investigated by
Right.
impartial parties.
So, as you said, no, there is not through the law also, but it has to go through a negotiated approach, that kind of a scenario. But is there if there is not an international body who takes care of that, like a international river network, or those guys are, I think, only advocacy bodies.
I am not aware of anybody which has the power to
Yes. Okay.
do such a thing at the international level. I mean, we have agreements with countries. For example, India has an agreement with Pakistan on the Indus, which
Okay.
has stood the test of time despite our bitter relations and many wars.
Tell us about that.
I don't know much
Okay,
about the Indus
okay,
Water Treaty,
okay,
but
okay.
there is a treaty.
Okay.
There is a
okay.
treaty, so you can have treaty agreements between countries
Right.
regarding water sharing.
It's a good way forward, I think. Yeah. Great, nice. Also, now that you are in Goa, you are doing a writer's residency in ICG International Center Goa, and you've been coming to Goa, what I have heard for a long time, because first time I met you in Goa Art and Literature Festival. Tell us a little bit about your love for Goa, and you've been coming here so often, no? Like for last 3 decades, for the last 30 years. Is there any visible red flags that is coming to your mind to tell us to be aware about, give a warning what the future lies, like, because you have done a lot of for your books, you have done a lot of critical environmental analysis studies, on those lines. If you can say something about the
Right.
new changes in
Right,
Goa
right,
that you are
right.
seeing. over the years?
Well, I mean, I love Goa. Everybody loves Goa. It's a beautiful place, and change over time is natural. Every
Yes.
place changes with
Yeah.
time. There is definitely a change in the built environment over time. One
Yes.
can see that is noticeable, and to some extent, of course, it is also inevitable. Uh, uh, the question is, because for Goa, the reason people love it so much is its natural environment,
True.
its beauty,
Yeah.
and that is why also a lot of people have moved here
Yes.
from the big cities, which has put pressure on the place but also driven up its real estate prices. Now the thing is that whether you talk about real estate or tourism or other economic activities which depend or feed off the population, the fact of the matter is that if the natural environment of Goa degrades, then it will kill the hen that lays the golden egg.
True.
The reason
Yes.
that people like Goa is precisely its natural beauty, and if that is damaged in the process of quick development, then everything that makes Goa special will
Yeah.
be
I
lost.
hope it doesn't go in the form of a resource curse, no? The curse of the resource. Great. I think we're getting to an end of this show, the time. And one last question that about that braided river. It was released in pandemic like 22 last year, 21.
Yeah.
And do you have any idea of a extended version or a new edition of that book of the braided river? You want to like say something about that? Are you writing on it? Working more on it?
No, I've not thought about an extended version, but of course, if the opportunity were to present itself, then I would like to add a little bit to it, because basically when we did the trip without any financial backing or institutional support.
Right.
So we did what we could by whatever means of transport we could, including the back of a dumper truck when we were heading to the McMahon line border with China. And that was how we traveled. We just did,
Got
used
it,
whatever. But we could not go into China, into Tibet.
Right.
And so for that, it's a quite a complicated and expensive procedure. Even if it is possible, it requires permission from the People's Liberation Army of China, and one has to go to Beijing just to apply for that permission.
Oh.
So basically, if ever the opportunity were to present itself, I would definitely love to see the Tibetan side.
Sweet. I wish you all the best to get a chance to do that.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Samrat, for your time and
Thank you.
this insightful conversation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is Samrat Chaudhary, and with his book The Braided River and the new book and the earlier book called Urban Jungle, you can look him up. His books are available in Amazon. And thank you for being with us. I will see you next week.